Jesus is standing in front of the temple in Jerusalem, the massive, gleaming brick and stone and gold house of God. And he says, "Destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days." The people listening to him said, "How are you going to do that? It took 46 years to build this temple." But Jesus wasn't talking about that temple. He was talking about himself. He essentially said, "Listen, I'm going to be killed. That's where this is headed. Because you don't confront corrupt systems of power without paying for it. Sometimes with your own blood." And so he's headed to his execution. If you had witnessed this divine life extinguished on a cross, how would you not be overwhelmed with despair? Is the world ultimately a cold, hard, dead place? Does death have the last word? Is it truly, honestly, actually dark? And so whatever light we do see, whatever good we do stumble upon, are those just blips on the radar? Momentary impulses in an otherwise meaningless existence? Because if that's the case, then despair is the only reasonable response. It's easy to be cynical. But Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it." He insists that his execution will not be the end. He's talking about something new and unexpected after his death. He's talking about resurrection. Resurrection announces that God has not given up on the world, because this world matters. This world that we live in right now. Dirt and blood and sweat and skin and light and water. This world that God is redeeming and restoring and renewing. Greed and violence and abuse, they are not right, and they cannot last. They belong to death, and death does not belong. Resurrection says that what we do with our lives matters. In this body, the one we inhabit right now, every act of compassion matters. Every work of art that celebrates the good and the true matters. Every fair and honest act of business and trade, every kind word, it all belongs, and it will all go on in God's good world. Nothing will be forgotten. Nothing will be wasted. It all has its place. Everybody believes something. Everybody believes somebody. Jesus invites us to trust resurrection. That every glimmer of good, every hint of hope, every impulse that elevates the soul is a sign, a taste, a glimpse of how things actually are and how things will ultimately be. Resurrection affirms this life and the next as a seamless reality, embraced, graced, and saved by God. There is an unexpected, mysterious presence that meets each of us when we're at our lowest, when we have no strength, when we have nothing left and can't go on. We hear the voice that speaks those words. "Destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it." Do you believe this? That's the question Jesus asked then, and that's the question he asks now. Jesus' friends arrived at the tomb, and they're told he isn't here. You didn't see that coming, did you? He isn't here, and there's nothing to fear, and nothing can ever be the same again. We are living in a world in the midst of rescue with endless, unexpected possibilities. "They will take my life, and I will die," Jesus said. But that will not be the end. And when you find yourself assuming that it's over, when it's lost, gone, broken, and it could never be put back together again, when it's been destroyed and you swear it could never be rebuilt, hold on a minute, because in that moment, things will in fact have just begun.
Happy Easter to everybody. Glad you guys could join us here at Waters Avenue. And thank you for those who brought your lilies today, commemorating somebody that you know, that you think of during this Easter time. One of the great things about Easter is that we have this theme of life coming from death. And the great thing about it, and as you'll hear here today, different perspectives, different angles, different ways that the light hits the diamond of resurrection, of death and resurrection that we'll be sharing here today. And it's a theme of, like I said, of resurrection. The idea of life coming from death, which actually sounds like an oxymoron. It sounds like it can't really be possible. Like, how can life come from death? Well, actually, it happens all the time. You actually see it in nature all the time, where a seed that's dead is planted in the ground and brings forth a tree, brings forth life. We actually literally consume life to keep living, you know? This idea of death, of passing away, of old things passing away and new things coming about, right? This, you can see it in a caterpillar as it transforms into a butterfly. It's no longer a caterpillar. It's now a beautiful butterfly. The life of the caterpillar is over. It's different. It's no longer the same. It's been changed. It's gone. You could say it's died. It's past. Nature has a relationship with death, where it's actually necessary. It's a very necessary part of bringing new life. In nature, the death is a process in which new life is formed. But as a whole humanity, death terrifies us. Death is a scary thing. And in fact, death of any form, we kind of stiff-arm it, and we avoid seeing the natural part and actually the beautiful process and the beautiful role that death plays in our life. But you see, the real problem isn't death. The real problem is fear. It's fear of death. Fear has a way of turning anything into a monster. It takes something and it morphs that and changes it into something else, into some of the most unpleasant situations that you can imagine. People are afraid of so many things that they don't need to be afraid of. People are afraid of things that they don't understand. And our brains are actually wired to do that. When you bring in a situation, your brain fills out the rest of the picture of what that scenario might be based on what your experience is with it. A lot of people don't have great experiences with death. Death is one of those experiences that morphs into a scary monster that we try to avoid looking at. Kind of to give you an idea of kind of what fear does, right, or how fear can play a part in affecting the way that you view life. I grew up next to a junkyard with junkyard dogs, right? There were dogs there that were there so that people didn't come into the junkyard and start taking start taking parts for their cars for free. These are these mean dogs that they had on the premises. And I actually lived like a block away from that. So these dogs actually would roam around our neighborhood, And so anytime I was outside, the dog would see you, he'd growl at you, he'd show you his teeth and start chasing you. And so I would run back into my house, into our gate, into the door, avoid him at all costs. I wouldn't look at this dog in the face. I wouldn't be playing outside. If the dog was outside, it was his territory, and I knew that. He was the alpha. I was, beta, or whatever. Like, I wasn't even there, I would let the dog roam the streets. He owned it. He owned me, and he knew it. There was multiple dogs that did that. And in fact, I would even hear stories of kids in the neighborhood who decided to play out in the street, and then the dog bit them, or chasing them on their bikes, and the dog would, nip at them right at their heels. I don't want any of that, That's not for me. And then, so I grew up being afraid of dogs, terrified of dogs. And I was concerned when people actually brought dogs into their houses as pets. Like, these are vicious animals. These are, death machines. Like, why would you bring a dog into your house and have it live with you and your children? That's not safe. So anytime I would see a dog terrified of the dog. My body actually would, fear would take over my body, would cripple me, I would have this anxiety, and I'd breathe in and out. I'd have shortness of breath, I'd start thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to jump out this way. If it comes to me, I'd pick up some rocks and put them in my pocket, walking around. And the moment it turned over and looked at me, I had a plan. Like something, my mind was in survival mode, It was like the fight or flight, except it was just flight, for me and dogs. I couldn't believe people would do that. It would have dogs in their house. And they'd be like, oh, he doesn't do anything. Like, yeah, I don't know if you know dogs, but dogs are vicious animals. They're there to protect things. And I'm not one of your own, so he's going to come after me, and I know it. So I didn't like dogs growing up. I was terrified. of them. But as I grew up, got exposure to other dogs, much nicer dogs, I realized that dogs are actually kind of cool, I still, every once in a while, if there's a dog around and he barks, I'll be like, whoa, yeah, I'm out. You go ahead. What do you need, I'll keep a safe distance around it. But what I had allowed to inform my perspective or my idea about what dogs were is scary, because that's the information I had. So if I saw another dog, it doesn't matter if he was friendly, if the majority of dogs were great, my mind filled in the picture and said, that is a monster. Step away, hide, grab pebbles, and don't miss when you throw. So dogs would paralyze me. I was scared of them. And people in general, we're afraid of things. We're afraid of all kinds of things. We're afraid of spiders. We're afraid of germs. We're afraid of guys whose name is Melvin, who's balding and has a mustache and glasses. We're afraid of that guy. We're afraid of people. Fear is triggered when our mind tries to fill in the blank. And now people are afraid of things like guys that wear turbans who go on planes. We're afraid of the term refugees. We're afraid of death. We don't associate death with anything good. We don't associate these things with anything good. And so we build the picture, and we start getting anxious, and we start getting shortness of breath, and we start getting worried. We start thinking about other things. And fear really is the trigger. Fear is triggered on the things that we don't know, that we don't have enough information. The number one associated emotion related to death is actually fear. So no wonder why we look around and we hear stories of people who have passed away, people that we know, people that we love. It saddens us. It cripples us and doesn't allow us to live in freedom. But this is where the story of Jesus and his death is so powerful and so awesome, because it teaches us that death is not something to be afraid of. In fact, overcoming fear, and fear of death, fear of any kind, but overcoming fear brings freedom. The story of Jesus, we don't actually give Jesus enough credit for this, actually, which sounds weird because we actually always talk about Jesus and how great he is. But leading up to his death, in the last week, in the last days of Jesus' life, we find him in a room, celebrating Passover, right? The deliverance of the people of Israel out of slavery from Egypt. And we find that he starts to draw these parallels to his life, right? He's adding another layer of significance to this. But Passover to the people of Israel was a celebration of freedom, as we've talked before. It meant new life, because they were enslaved before, and now they weren't enslaved. That was the freedom that they would celebrate, and that the lamb that they would kill and the blood that was sprinkled over the door during that last plague, where the angel passed over the people of Israel, really wasn't as much of a sacrificial lamb as it was an identifier of here lie the people, or here sit the people, or here live the people who are oppressed. Pass over us. This isn't for us. You come to bring deliverance. And this blood really was a symbol of identification. Here are the oppressed. Here are the enslaved. And for years, people celebrated Passover as a big party. And they would sacrifice that lamb, right, just as a reminder of what had taken place during the Passover year. And this time here now Jesus is celebrating it with them as he did every year. And this time he knows this is his last one. And he draws parallels of himself with this established Passover meal to give it another layer of significance. And that is that just as the lamb that had to die to identify those people who were oppressed and enslaved, so Jesus would die to bring all those people who are oppressed and who are enslaved and bring them new life. He would bring freedom. He would bring a new way of life. In the garden, moments before being taken away, Jesus is praying, right, with his disciples. Well, actually by himself. Disciples couldn't hang with him. They fell asleep. And he was there praying, and he was overwhelmed with sadness, and he was overwhelmed with grief. And he was like, God, I just don't want to do this. If there's any other way to do it, let's do that one instead. But if this is the only way to bring life to the oppressed, to bring life to the enslaved, if this is the only way to do this, let's do this. But if there's any other way, let's choose that one. But here it's really interesting to me that fear didn't grip Jesus the way that fear grips us when confronting painful situations and confronting really his death, right? Fear, what it does is it paralyzes us, as I mentioned. It gives us tunnel vision. We aren't able to think in the bigger picture. We see a very narrow way of life, and it's really more about preserving ourselves more so than living for other people or helping other people. We start making quick decisions and assumptions about information so that we can survive. We're not able to process all the information. But here Jesus, with clarity of thought, overwhelmed and sad with grief, but still he has clarity of thought and says, I know what my mission is. I'm not afraid of this death because this is going to bring new life. This is going to show the way for people to walk. This is going to show the way of how to combat oppressive structures. And I am willing to do that. And I am ready to do that. I'm not afraid of death. Because the moment that fear comes in, then the oppressive system wins. The moment that fear is evident, those in power win. And Jesus said, if there's any other way, we'll take it. But if this is the way, I'll do it. And that's why Peter ends up denying Jesus, right? Because Peter's like, hey, Jesus, I'll die with you. We'll all go together. And he's like, listen, man, you haven't overcome your fear. The moment that people start questioning you, you're going to be like, oh, I don't know the guy. You're going to deny me 3 times before even the rooster crows in the morning. You're already going to be afraid. You won't be able to overcome your fear. And it won't allow you to bring in this new kingdom. So we don't give Jesus enough credit to really overcoming that fear. Overcoming fear of death. And he wouldn't be a man if he didn't have to. And what I mean by a man, I don't mean like a man, Jesus man up. I mean like a human. He wouldn't be human if he didn't have to overcome fear. See, Jesus stands as an example of what can be possible when we overcome fear. What dies in the face of death here is not the fact that his life is going to go away, but rather is his fear. And with that arises new life. When fear is dead, what comes out from that is an opportunity to be open to love, to be open to peace, and to be open to justice. We aren't afraid of the stranger. We aren't afraid of the homeless guy. We're not afraid of the refugee and what they might do. We're not afraid of the guy or girl who's different than us. When fear dies, up from it grows love. And now from it grows a new way of life, not only for ourselves, but for other people. You can't open yourself up to love until fear dies. The Easter story is about a man who had overcome fear and embraced his death. And as a result, he brought life. We also can bring new life if we follow Jesus' example. Let's not allow fear to stop us from embracing the fate of standing for the oppressed. This is the significance of new life.
Night has passed, and the day lies open. Thank you. Night has passed, and the day lies open. Night has passed, and the day lies open before us. Let us pray with one heart and mind. Let us pray with one heart and mind as we rejoice, as we rejoice in the gift of this day, in the gift of this day. Morning comes with the light of your presence. Morning comes with the light of your presence upon us as we rejoice in the gift of this day, in the gift of this day, in the gift of this day, in the gift of this day. Morning has spoken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise from them springing fresh from the word. In the gift of this day, 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 as we gift of this day, in the gift of this day.
Two people are walking down a road. They're headed from Jerusalem to a town called Emmaus. They just celebrated Passover, and they've just witnessed a man from Galilee say and do some amazing things, but they also witnessed him crucified, given an insurrectionist death at the hands of the Romans on the word of the religious leaders. As they're walking along, they're discussing the things that they've just seen and heard in Jerusalem this week. Another man joins them and says, "Hey, what's new?" "What's new?" they ask. "What's new? Have you been living under a rock? This last week has been crazy. This man named Jesus, he came, he started preaching in the temple, started saying and doing all these crazy things. We thought he was bringing God's new way of structuring the world. We thought things were finally going to be different." And the man says, "That sounds exciting. What happened? You don't seem as excited as you seem telling me the story." "Well, he's dead. We were wrong. He wasn't the one to make things happen. He wasn't the one who was going to bring God's kingdom. He wasn't the one that was going to bring anything new. We were wrong. So to answer your original question, stranger, nothing's new. Things are the way they were before. Things are the way they've always been." And as they approached the town, it was getting dark, it was getting late, and being, hospitable, good, neighborly people, they said, "Hey, come join us for dinner. You don't need to keep traveling." And the man's like, "Nah, I got to get going." And like, "No, please, stay. Please, really." So he stays, and as they sit down to the table, he takes the bread, he breaks it, he blesses it, and he gives it to them. You're all here today, all right? You're all here today. But you're not all the same. We're not all the same in this room. And I would say there's probably two general groups of people. You might fit into the category that says, "All right, I'm in church on Easter, but I don't know if I need to be. I don't know if I can bring myself, because of the way I was raised, because of the things I've heard, because of the books I've read, because of I don't know what, but I don't know if I can bring myself to believe that a man actually raised from the dead." But there's something there for you, right? Because you're here. But you struggle with it. You don't know if that makes sense. I invite you to find meaning in Easter. You might be the other group that says, I'm 100% sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus of Nazareth physically, actually, literally, if I had been there, could have videotaped it, raised from the grave. I invite you to find meaning in Easter. Because you see, these stories that are told in the Gospels, their purpose is not just to hand down something to posterity. It's not notes that were taken so that these events could be reported on the evening news. These are interpretations of events. They meant so much to the people that witnessed them that they had to tell the story, and they had to tell it in a way that would convey all of the power that it had for them. They give us not just an event, because an event in isolation doesn't do anything. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a noise? The classic question. So it is with any event. Without giving it meaning, it doesn't have any meaning. And so we see that the gospel writers give meaning to this event. And they tell us that the message of love in the face of hate, that good in the face of evil, that justice in the face of inequality, that mercy in the place of aggression will prevail. The powers of evil have nothing they can do to the forces of good. You cannot destroy God's kingdom or its right way of structuring human relationships. Think about the feeling the religious leaders and the Roman officials must have had as the stories start circulating that people are seeing Jesus. Oh, crap. What are we going to do now? Right? Oh, no. We thought we nipped it in the bud, and people are telling stories that they've seen him again. All of the power is taken away. If the one thing you have is the ability to kill someone, and you can't use that to keep them down, you have nothing left. There is no power in death. That's why the Apostle Paul connects resurrection to working for a better world. After talking about the resurrection and connecting it to our future hope, he says, just know that anything you work for related to God's kingdom is not in vain. Your efforts will not go wasted. How can he be sure of that? Because he understood from the death and resurrection of Jesus that you cannot destroy good with something as cumbersome and vulgar as death. If you try to destroy life, it just pops up 3 days later somewhere else. This is the message that gives us hope. Hope that our world will receive the healing it needs. Hope that all people will live having what they need. Hope that wars will end. Hope that slaves will be free. But about this hope, remember the story of the two people that I just told like 4 minutes ago? The stranger on the road that comes to them. When the man took the bread, broke it, gave it to them, and shared a meal with them, the story says that immediately they realized it was Jesus. So they go and they tell the other disciples, hey, this guy just appeared to us. We didn't recognize him for the longest time. We walked like 3 miles and we had no idea it was him. But then when he took the bread and broke it, we realized it was him. One of the people that they're talking to is like, I can't buy into that. It doesn't make sense. I don't have any hope that things in this world can be different than they are right now. Poor Thomas, the imaginationless one. So just then, Thomas appears to him. Jesus appears to Thomas and he says, come on, man. Here I am. Happy now? Is this what you needed? And he says that you saw me and now you believe in the message. You believe that things can change in this world because I'm alive. But blessed are those who don't need this clumsy attempt to prove something. Blessed are those who believe without seeing, Jesus tells Thomas. And that's us. Jesus is not going to appear to you today and let you touch the wounds. If he does, bring him to me and I will feel very silly and I will offer you an apology. But the chances are that that's not going to happen. But you can be absolutely sure that when it's late and it's too dark to travel and you're worried about a friend you've just met that they may go hungry, so you invite him to dinner, you can be absolutely sure he's there. We don't have a lot of proof, do we? We look around and it doesn't feel like Easter. There's a major war going on in the Middle East that each day looks like will involve more and more of us. People live in poverty. Children are taken as slaves for an industry built on destruction. It's tempting to think that resurrection has no meaning. But Christians are the crazy people who, after betting on love and losing, pause for a second and say, want to go double or nothing? We hope against hope against hope. There's an old Easter hymn that says, you ask me how I know he lives within my heart. I think that sums it up. If someone came to me today and said, come on, Easter, seriously? What about this and this? And then there's this proof and this proof. Like, nobody can raise from the dead, I'd be like, look, man, I don't know about all that. I'm not talking about all of that. You're probably right. There's not a whole lot of proof for resurrection. It doesn't fit into the world I see around me. It doesn't. But I know that something happens in moments of hospitality. I know that something happens in moments of sacrifice for someone I love. When I see someone forgiving their enemy, something comes alive inside of me. In the moment that we stand with someone who's falsely accused and crucified, something happens. It's just a glimpse. Yes, just a glimpse. Remember, as soon as they saw Jesus at the table, at the moment they recognized him for who he was, he disappeared. They couldn't hold on to him and make him do what they wanted him to do. But it's a glimpse into a life that cannot be destroyed by death. And so I invite you all to embrace that life. Live in the hope and freedom of the resurrection. Celebrate the victory of Jesus over destruction and violence and oppression and prejudice. Hope with everything you have. Hope against hope. Take the bad bet on resurrection.